Hello and welcome everyone to our English lesson. Today is a Year 6 lesson on day 7 of our distance learning program. Okay, and I'm just going to put it into a bit of a context for you. In English, you should be listening to and discussing a wide range of fiction. You should become familiar with a wide range of books, including myths and legends, and retell some of these stories orally. Today you are going to meet a legendary Muslim queen called Scheherazade, and you will find out who she is by listening to the explanation I'm going to give you. Okay, so let's have a look at our vault this morning. We are learning to explore the story of Scheherazade through drama. Your drama technique today will be hot seating. You will then practice letter writing using characterization to write in role. The story takes place in Baghdad, and I'm sure you remember this picture when we did the ancient Islamic civilization topic. All right, just to refresh your memory. This story is from the 1001 Nights. This book was a collection of the finest tales in Arabia, and it was written over many hundreds of years. They told wonderful stories of giants and genies, princesses and heroes, monsters and magic. Okay. Now, it must have been really awful for Scheherazade. Every night, she had to find a new story to tell the king. Now, this is what happened with the king. King Shahryar was, he married a lady every night, the story goes. And he would then, at the end of every night, he would have his new wife beheaded. This was done in anger. He found out that his first wife had betrayed him, and he did the same thing every night for 1,000 nights. He would behead his wife, and until one night, the daughter of one of his ministers or advisors, Scheherazade, volunteered to marry the king. Can you think why she might have volunteered to marry the king? Yes. Okay, that's right. So she wanted to save their lives. Now, Scheherazade had spent many days and nights learning off by heart all the stories she could find. So when the king came to visit her, she began to tell him one of her stories. Okay? And in this way, she prevented the king from killing her, because she would stop at a point in the story where, she would keep him in suspense. She would keep him going all night long, have him listen to the story in awe and wonder. But then, as the sun came up, before the story was over, Scheherazade would stop the story, and the king would beg her to continue. But Scheherazade used to say it was too late and she was too tired, and that if he wanted to hear the end of the story, then he would have to keep her alive and come back the next day. Okay, and in this way, then, Scheherazade kept herself alive night after night, knowing the king would never have her killed as long as she had stories to tell him. So, now imagine yourself seated close to Scheherazade. Okay, let me just take your mind back a bit. Let's think about Scheherazade sitting in her room at the top of the tallest tower in the palace, combing her long dark hair. Okay? She looks at the image of the woman staring back at her from the mirror, and it was one that she now barely recognized. 500 days and 500 nights she had lived in the palace, and every night when the king visited her, she had to tell him a story that would delight him so much that the next day he would not kill her. Now, at this point, you may pause the video and think about some questions. Think about what type of questions you would ask Scheherazade if you were sat close to her. Okay? What type of questions would you ask her? Now, the reason you are going to ask her questions is because the drama technique I mentioned earlier, the hot seating, is where you take on the role. Now, your role in this session is to become a story researcher. Okay? And in order to become a story researcher, you are going to ask Scheherazade lots of questions in order to get permission to enter the palace. Okay? You have to get permission to enter the king's palace, and in that way, you will be able to help Scheherazade write more stories to keep the king from killing more women. Okay, so this is what I will show you now. I'll give you some examples of the hot seating questions. Now remember to be really polite and respectful when you are asking your questions. For example, my tone of voice. Now you could model this with someone who's sitting close to you. It may be your mom or your dad or an older sibling. But if you don't have anyone, you can do it by yourself. Okay? So if I'm the story researcher, you enroll as the story researcher. Excuse me, my lady, we were wondering if you had ever tried to escape. Scheherazade's reply, no, never. This would anger the king very much, and he would get into a fit of rage. My lady, are you allowed visitors? Yes, I am, so long as the king approves. Could we visit you? Perhaps we may be able to help you. That would be most kind. Thank you. I need help to find more stories. Could you help me with that? We'll see. Okay, so now I am out of row. And so, girls, this is what you are going to do now. After you've asked some questions and you thought about the answers, you can then think about a letter that you are going to write to the king. Okay, Scheherazade has advised you that she does need help, but if the king approves, you will be able to enter the palace. So your task this morning will be on writing a letter to King Shahryar to persuade him to let us enter his palace and ask his permission in order to help Scheherazade. Okay? Here, as a story researcher, you must think about the language of persuasion. What words and phrases could you use in your letter? And also, because it's a letter to the king, you will be writing a formal letter. Okay? So your formal letter will have a layout similar to this one. You have your address on the top. You will have, so you are the sender. You will then have the king's address, remember to make it appropriate to the king and to the palace. You also have to consider the date, because remember the story is set in the 10th century, which is in the year 900. So, and your greeting, you are writing to a king, so your greeting might be Your Royal Highness, Your Majesty. Think about the language that would have been used in those times as well, all right? And then you think about your ending. Yours sincerely. You could also use yours faithfully, and then your signature becomes your name. In the content or the body of the letter is the purpose you are writing is to get the king's permission to come to the palace so you can help Scheherazade. So consider your introduction very carefully, as well as your body, the middle of the letter, and the conclusion. Don't forget to use your toolkit. You will be getting a toolkit that says Persuasive Word Bank, and you can pull out some words and phrases from the word bank to help you in the letter. So how will you know if you have had a successful letter written? So look at your success criteria. These are the steps. Your letter is set accurately, like I showed you in the example. The introduction then gives general information about you and your reason for writing. Don't forget to mention that you are a story researcher. You must separate your paragraphs for each of your reasons given. And within that, within the structure of your paragraphs, think about your language, the devices that you will be using, such as conjunctions that give flow from one paragraph to the next. And here you have some examples of conjunctions. And you also have to think about a conclusion that suggests what you hope the king will do now, with devices such as to conclude, in summary, finally, overall, therefore, in brief. So select some of these phrases to use in your conclusion. And remember the whole tone of your letter, here referred to as a voice, that sounds like you are writing in the character of a 10th century scholar rather than a 21st century child. All right, so don't forget, you can go back, you can rewind the video, pause it in places you want to, listen to the beginning again if you want to, go back to the questions to Scheherazade when you did the hot seating, have a practice with that first, and then sit down to draft your letter. As soon as you've drafted your letter in your notepad or in your distance learning book, don't forget to send me a copy of your first draft so that I can provide you some feedback. Thank you very much for listening to today's lesson. Have a good day.